Silent Saturday is the day nothing happens. Jesus is in the tomb. The disciples are discouraged and scattered, hiding behind locked doors. The women who followed him are home, observing the Sabbath, with grief sitting in their chests like stone. And heaven is quiet. No angels appear with explanations. No divine voice breaks through. No signs point toward what's coming. Just silence. We don't talk much about this day. We know how the story ends, so we tend to move quickly from Friday's crucifixion to Sunday's resurrection. We know Saturday doesn't last. We know hope is on the way. But the disciples didn't know that. For them, Saturday was simply the first full day of trying to exist in a world where Jesus was gone, where everything they'd staked their lives on felt shattered, where God seems absent, and the future looked like nothing but more of the same grief and confusion. The questions they carried that day were not faithless ones. They were deeply vulnerable and honest ones. Was he really who he said he was? Did any of it matter? Where is God in this? Silent Saturday makes space for those kinds of questions, refuses to rush past them, because most of us know what it feels like to live inside that kind of silence. We know what it is to pray and hear nothing back, to wait for clarity that doesn't arrive, to sit in grief or confusion or fear and feel not just that things are hard, but that God has left the scene and we have no ability to reach him. And the hardest part is rarely the pain of loss. It's the not knowing. If we knew relief was 3 days away, we could endure almost anything. But we don't know. We're Easter people living in a silent Saturday world, and Saturday sometimes feels like it has no end in sight. Here's an important truth. Faith in God, when God goes silent, doesn't mean pretending the silence doesn't hurt. It doesn't mean bypassing grief or manufacturing hope before you're ready. Sometimes faith is simply staying put, continuing to breathe, continuing to exist inside the weight of what is, even when you can't see a clear way forward. That's what the disciples did. They didn't have hope yet. They didn't have clarity. They had each other and grief and the terrifying open question of what would or would not happen next. And somehow that was enough to get them through the day. Silent Saturday reminds us that waiting isn't wasted time. It isn't a gap between the moments that matter. It is the moment that matters. It's the place where we discover we can't control outcomes, can't force resolution, and can't make God speak up and give us the answers when God has chosen to be quiet. We can only wait. And waiting is harder than almost anything because it requires us to hold unresolved tension without demanding that it resolve on our schedule. The disciples didn't know, sitting in that silence, that God was already at work. Not in any way they could see or feel or measure. But death did not have the final word, even when it looked like it did. Something was happening in the quiet, something that would change everything. They just had to wait for it. And so do we. When we find ourselves in our own Saturdays, when prayers seem to stop at the ceiling, when grief is stubborn and unyielding, when the future is a blank wall and God feels distant, we are not doing faith wrong. We're not failing. We are in the in-between, the place where hope hasn't arrived yet, but where despair doesn't quite get the final word either. The truth is, most of life is lived like it's Silent Saturday. We spend far more time waiting than celebrating, far more time sitting with unanswered questions than receiving clear direction, far more time in mystery and silence than in moments when God's presence feels obvious and near. If we can't find God in the mystery and silence, we will miss most of what faith actually requires of us. As the book of Hebrews reminds us, faith is the evidence of things hoped for and the conviction of things not yet seen. Silent Saturday teaches us that God's indefinite silence is not punishment. That waiting, painful, uncertain, exhausting waiting, is a legitimate and even necessary part of following Jesus. The disciples endured it one heavy hour at a time, without knowing what was coming. And when Saturday arrived, it wasn't because they'd earned it or figured it out or managed their grief with sufficient courage. It came because God was already at work in ways none of them could see. But that's tomorrow. Today is Saturday. Saturday is for sitting in the quiet, for holding your questions without demanding answers, for letting grief and lament and sorrow and bewilderment be what it is, for trusting, barely perhaps, but still trusting that God going quiet is not the same as God going absent. God has not left, even when it feels like he has, even when there seems to be no voice, no vision, no sign, even in the tomb, especially in the tomb. You don't have to take my word for it. Just wait.